Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're looking into something pretty big, this new executive order and what it means for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or like everybody calls it, DEI. We've got, let's see, we got that video commentary from Dr. Liz Wilson, the DEI expert, and also a clip from that interview with Jeff, who covers diversity in the workplace. Should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic right now. Lots of strong opinions on both sides.
For sure. And Dr. Wilson, well, she definitely doesn't hold back in her commentary.
Yeah.
She even says that January 20th, 2025 was like, quote, a dark day for fairness and inclusion, unquote, in the U.S. federal government.
Wow. Yeah, she's not mincing words.
Yeah.
I think it shows just how much this whole thing, well, it's executive order, how much it's upsetting people.
Yeah.
It feels really personal for a lot of folks, like it's a step backwards.
And she really digs into how this order, the one that wants to get rid of, quote, wasteful, unquote, DEI programs, how it's really hurting marginalized groups. She talks about veterans, people with disabilities, women, indigenous communities, religious minorities. Like the list goes on and on. And it's not just about, some training sessions or whatever.
Yeah, she makes that point really clear. It's not just about workshops or, it's often about really important resources and support, like those mentorship programs and networking opportunities, things that can really help people, get ahead.
Exactly. Like, how are people supposed to succeed if they're not even given the same chances? And, I thought it was interesting what she said about federal contractors, how this could affect them too.
Oh, yeah, both here and in other countries. They might feel like they have to scale back their own DEI stuff if they want to keep those government contracts. It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another.
Yeah. It's like the government sending a message.
Yeah.
And everybody else is listening. What's weird is how the private sector seems to be doing the opposite. Like a lot of companies were actually focusing more on DEI now.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about this whole thing. It's like two different worlds. You've got the government going one way and businesses going the other. Makes you wonder, where the real change is going to come from.
It does. And Dr. Wilson, she's really adamant that DEI isn't just some trendy phrase or something, something you just say to sound good. She ties it to real results, like more innovation, attracting and keeping good employees, building trust within a company, and ultimately, just getting better outcomes.
And she uses some good examples, too, to back up her points. Like when she talks about innovation, she mentions this tech company. They were trying to make a product for all sorts of different customers, but they were having trouble.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And then they realized, wait a minute, our design team is like all the same type of people. So they diversified their team.
Right.
And guess what? They finally had a breakthrough.
That makes total sense. The more perspectives you have, the better your solutions will be, right? It's not rocket science.
Exactly. And I think that's why this executive order is making so many people nervous. Dr. Wilson lays out some pretty scary possibilities. Like, what if this keeps going? What if unions get weaker and companies feel like they have to abandon their values?
Like it becomes normal to just exclude people.
Exactly. It's like going back in time.
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Jeff's interview. He gives us some good background on this whole trend of companies cutting back on DEI stuff. He starts off by reminding us that this isn't really new. What we're seeing now, it actually goes back to things that happened during the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah. Historical context is so important. It helps us understand, like, the bigger picture. This executive order isn't just happening out of nowhere. It's part of a longer story.
Right. It's like a pattern. And Jeff reminds us about some pretty big changes that happened back then, like how whole departments focused on DEI were just gone, and how the definition of gender got narrowed down to just biological sex.
Which basically left out a ton of people.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how he connects those actions from back then to what's going on in companies now.
Yeah, he's saying that those earlier decisions, like, planted a seed, and now this new executive order is, like, giving that seed water and sunlight. It's helping it grow.
It makes sense. And then there's that part in the order where agencies are told to investigate companies that might be doing, quote, illegal, unquote, DEI practices. That word illegal, man, it's like a red flag.
It definitely makes companies think twice. Like, what are we allowed to do? What's the line? It creates so much confusion.
And fear, too. Right. Companies are afraid of getting in trouble. So they might just avoid doing anything, even if they want to.
Exactly. And that's where Jeff's explanation of the laws is really helpful. He goes back to Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's like the foundation of so many employment discrimination cases.
Yeah, that's the one that bans discrimination based on race or gender when hiring people.
Right. And it's wild how that law, which was meant to protect people of color from being discriminated against, is now being used by some groups to argue against affirmative action and DEI programs.
Like they're saying that those programs actually discriminate against white people.
It's like turning the whole thing on its head.
It's like they're using the very tool that was meant to create equality to actually create more inequality.
It's pretty twisted. And Jeff explains how this strategy has been gaining traction for years. Now this executive order is just throwing more fuel on the fire.
It's like we're watching a battle play out over what these laws actually mean. You know, how they should be interpreted and used.
And this executive order is trying to tip the scales in a specific direction. It's not a law itself, but it's trying to change how we think about and enforce the laws we already have.
It's like a sneaky way to change things. And Jeff thinks we're going to see a lot more legal battles over this. You know, people fighting over what Title VII really allows, which could lead to even more restrictions on DEI efforts.
Yeah, it could completely change the game. When it comes to diversity and inclusion in this country, this is a really big deal.
It's a little scary, to be honest.
It really does feel like a turning point, doesn't it? This
Yeah.
executive order, like it could have huge consequences.
Yeah, it's not just about those people, directly affected by cuts to federal programs.
Yeah.
Dr. Wilson argues that less DEI could hurt everyone eventually, especially when it comes to innovation.
Right. She's saying that real innovation comes from bringing together all sorts of people, with different backgrounds and experiences and ways of thinking. She makes a great analogy in her commentary.
Oh, yeah? What was it?
It was like, think about an orchestra. She's like, you wouldn't want an orchestra with just violins, right?
That would be pretty boring.
Exactly. You need the different instruments, the different sounds to make something beautiful and, powerful.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think diversity isn't just about being politically correct or whatever. It's about getting the best ideas and the best solutions.
Right. Exactly. A team where everyone's the same, they might get stuck in a rut. But a diverse team, they're more likely to challenge each other, see things from different angles, and come up with really creative solutions.
It just makes sense. And what about that connection between DEI and hiring? What do you think about that?
Well, it's pretty obvious now that companies that really care about DEI, they have a much easier time attracting and keeping top talent.
Makes sense. People want to work somewhere they feel valued.
Right.
Exactly. The best people, they want to work somewhere where they can be themselves. They're not going to go to some company that feels like it's stuck in the past.
Especially younger people.
Yeah.
They've grown up with so much more diversity than previous generations. They expect it everywhere they go.
Right. And companies that don't get that, they're going to miss out on a ton of talent.
Yeah.
It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about being smart. In today's world, a diverse workforce is just essential for success. It's like a no-brainer at this point. And Dr. Wilson, she also talked about something else that really stuck with me, the link between DEI and trust. She says, when people feel like they belong and that their voices are heard, they're more likely to trust the organization and its leaders.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Think about it. When you feel safe and respected somewhere, you're more likely to open up, share your ideas, work well with others. But when you feel like you're an outsider, that trust disappears. And that can lead to all sorts of problems. Less productivity, people quitting, damage to a company's reputation.
Makes you think about what this executive order could do to morale within the government itself. If employees feel like their identities and experiences don't matter, how are they supposed to stay motivated?
Exactly. It all goes back to what Dr. Wilson was saying. DEI isn't just some nice to have. It's about creating a workplace where everyone can do their best.
I think so. We've talked a lot about the potential downsides of this executive order, but we should probably acknowledge that some people support scaling back DEI initiatives. What are some of the reasons they give?
Well, the executive order itself claims to be about cutting wasteful programs and being more efficient with taxpayer money. Some people say that certain DEI programs have just become too bureaucratic, or they're focused on appearances rather than real change.
It's interesting how waste gets defined. Dr. Wilson definitely disagrees with that assessment. She argues that a lot of these programs offer essential support and resources for marginalized groups, things that can actually level the playing field and make things more fair.
And Jeff mentioned how some groups are using existing laws like Title VII to actually challenge affirmative action in DEI programs. It's kind of crazy. They're saying these programs discriminate against white people.
That's like the opposite of what the law was supposed to do.
It is, and it shows how complex this whole thing is. It's not just about cutting a few programs. It's about a whole shift in how we think about diversity and inclusion. And it could mean undoing a lot of progress that's been made.
So basically, it's a big fight over how we interpret and use these laws. And this executive order is like adding fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. It's a really tense situation. This is about more than just a few programs. It's about the fundamental values we have as a society.
It really makes you think. This whole conversation reminds me of something Jeff said in his interview. He talked about how Title VII, the law that people are using to challenge DEI initiatives, it's kind of like the rules of a game.
That's a good way to put it.
It was originally made to make sure everyone had a fair chance.
Hmm.
But now some people are trying to change the rules to give an advantage to one side over the other.
It's a good analogy, and it gets to the heart of the matter. Do we want a society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, or are we going back to a system where some people have all the advantages and others are left behind?
Those are pretty different visions of the future. And this executive order seems to be pushing us in a specific direction.
It does. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to really understand what's at stake and to think critically about what kind of world we want to live in.
It's wild, isn't it? Like, we're seeing these two things happening at the same time. On one hand, people are like finally getting it.
Yeah.
You know how important DEI is? More and more companies are realizing that diversity is good for business. And it's the right thing to do.
Totally. It's like this push and pull.
Yeah.
Companies are trying to make things more fair, but then there's this backlash trying to stop them. It's a lot of legal stuff, too.
Yeah, and it makes things so confusing for organizations. Like, they want to do the right thing, but they're worried about getting sued. Like that whole illegal thing Jeff was talking about. It's scary for companies.
Yeah, it makes them hesitate. Even if they believe in DEI, they might be afraid to do anything because they don't want to get in trouble.
So what now? What can people actually do if they're worried about all this?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware, pay attention to what's going on. Read articles, listen to podcasts like this one, stay informed about what both sides are saying.
Don't be in the dark.
Right.
The more you know, the better you can respond.
Exactly. And don't underestimate your own voice. Talk to people about this stuff, your friends, your family, your elected officials. Support organizations that are fighting for DEI.
Make sure people are hearing the message loud and clear.
Right? And it's not just about making noise, it's about having real conversations.
Yeah.
You're challenging people's assumptions, pushing back against this idea that DEI is somehow unfair or that it goes against merit.
Exactly. It's not about giving anyone special treatment. It's about making sure everyone has the same opportunities.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that diversity and inclusion make us stronger as individuals and as a society. Think about all the amazing things we could achieve if we all work together.
We can't let fear and division hold us back.
This is a big moment. The choices we make now will have a huge impact on the future. We can't sit on the sidelines.
Well said. We've covered a lot today. But I think the main takeaway is this. Stay informed, stay involved, and keep fighting for the kind of world you want to see. A world where everyone has the chance to succeed, to contribute, and to just be themselves. That's what DEI is all about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.